think it might sound crazy to believe in a God who loves. In a world where our hearts are breaking and we're lost in the mess we've made, like a blinded light in the dead of night, it's the gospel that makes a way.
Good morning, H2O. My name is Grace. I am a student leader here. I lead Thursday Life Group with Hannah and Josh. We want to welcome you to service this morning. If you're new here, check out our website. We have a connect option for you. It says, I'm new, and fill out a connection card so that we can reach out to you and get to know you a little better. One of the ways that we keep our community alive here in H2O is our life groups. We just get together and talk about scripture, talk about what's going on in our life, and that's happening Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m. in Rocket Hall. We'd love to see you there. And lastly, get in touch with our social media. We're on many different platforms, and that's how you'll find out what's going on with us. So we're going to start worshiping here. So however that's comfortable for you at home, wherever you're at, whoever you're with, let's sing to the Lord together.
Jesus, you alone. from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. In the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till the stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who'd come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born, and the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not fade. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Praise praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for just the opportunity to live stream this morning, to have a message that you can challenge us. Pray that just Matt is able to speak your word and speak clearly. And just thank you for the church and just the fellowship that we've been able to have this year. And in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Feel free to say hi in the chat.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am Pastor Matt Olszewski, one of the pastors here at H2O Toledo. So glad you guys are joining us this morning. I'm fired up. I really loved that first set of worship. It's Valentine's Day. Love is in the air, whatever that means. But I'm super excited to be with you guys this morning and pumped about continuing our series that we have been doing the past 3 weeks now. This is the third week. It's called In Exile. And for those of you that have been with us, or for those of you that are joining us the first time, just a little bit of a recap. We are going through an old part of the Bible that many people are pretty intimidated to read through. It's called the Prophets. And this is a time in history with God's people where, for one reason or another, lots of many different reasons, God's people were exiled, taken out of their home, and taken to a foreign land, a place that was uncomfortable, a place that was different, a place that wasn't home. And the reason we're talking about this is because throughout our lives, we've been kind of framing it this way, is that throughout our lives, we have many exile moments where we could definitely say the past year has been an exile moment. None of us have felt normal. None of us have felt in our place. None of us have felt completely comfortable with the changes that have been made. And so it's felt like we have been taken out of our home. We've been in exile. And throughout our lives, we will have many moments like this. Smaller time frame, maybe not lasting a whole year, but moments where we feel like we're on the outside. And does God even care? What is God doing in those moments? And so that's what we've been talking through. We've been in this place of the Bible called the Prophets, like I said. And I'm so excited to continue this because what I love about the Prophets is they are epic stories. Like, such big stories that you can't even wrap your mind around sometimes. And I talked about one of those last week, and I'm going to continue that this week. But I want to reframe a little bit about how we're looking at being in exile. Because again, I talked about how we've been framing it as there's these mini exile moments within our lives. And while that is true, I also want to reiterate that it is also true that living a life of following Jesus is living a life of exile. Like, our whole being as Christians, that if we have decided to follow Jesus, we have committed to living our lives as exiles, kind of feeling out of place, kind of feeling a little bit different than our culture. And here's a little bit more about what I mean by this, because if you've been with us the past few weeks, you know that I've gone out of my way to describe or reshape or reform or even make bigger the definition of what it means to be a Christian. Because being a Christian is just more than just a set of beliefs. Being a Christian is more than just what we are against or what we disagree with. Being a Christian is more than just worship songs. It's more than just prayer. It's more than just Bible stories. It's more than just Sunday church. Being a Christian means so much more than that. And the reason I've been trying to not redefine it, but reshape our ideas and enlarge our idea of what it means to be a Christian is because we've lost kind of our identity of what that means. There's a lot of different images out there of what a Christian is and what a Christian isn't. And so that's why I want to just reestablish. This is simply what it means to be a Christian. A Christian woman, a Christian man is someone who recognizes that they're a sinner, that they have sin in their lives, and that when we look around the world and we see the chaos and we see the disaster and we see how people are mistreated and how there's not equality and there's not justice, when we look at that, we have to admit that maybe we don't contribute a lot to it, but we definitely contribute to it some. That we are all sinners. And that because of that sin, our hearts need to be made new. That's what I talked about last week, that we have to have God intervene and take our heart of stone and change it into a new heart. And so that when we're a Christian, we recognize that we need God to intervene to do that. And so because of our sin, because of our relationship with God, and he wants us to have a relationship with him, he had to do something about that sin. And so he sent his son Jesus to this world in miraculous ways as a baby, grows up as an adult, and he gives his life a living sacrifice. He died, took our place as the payment of sin that we should have gotten. We should have had consequences for our sin. But Jesus says, I'm going to show you how much I love you. And even though you have a heart of stone, I want your heart to come alive. I want you to truly live. And so Jesus dies. He sacrifices. He dies on a cross so that we can become fully alive. And that when we acknowledge that, when we see that, and we say, God, I'm going to trust you, our lives completely change. Our hearts start to see the world differently. Sin, that which held us so strongly, becomes a little bit loose. And we now give up our lives. Because again, as I talked about last week, our purpose, that when we have to refocus our purpose when we're in exile moments, our purpose is to give up our lives in order so that we can live life to the fullest, the way that Jesus promised. It seems opposite. It seems like that's not how life should work, that in order for us to experience life to the most, we should give it up and serve others. But that is the life and the experience that Jesus told us is completely worth following. And that's what we do as Christians. That's what it means to be a Christian. And so when I say living a life of following Jesus is living a life of exile, it means that because we have decided to follow Jesus, because we are a Christian, we have decided to live this life that is different. We've decided to stick out. We've decided to be a little bit uncomfortable. Because while God created us to be in this world that he created, he didn't create us to blend in with the ever-changing cultures that we have throughout history. Because there's different messages of importance, of what is important to different cultures. But God's saying, live my way. Give up your life according to what I say. That's how you're going to stick out. And then when you love people like Jesus loved people and gave up his life, you're most certainly going to stick out and people are going to take notice. That's what it means to be a Christian. And so this morning, I want us to consider a few questions. Because last week we talked about refocusing our purpose when we're in exile. We're going to talk about something a little bit different. Because in the Christian life, it comes, for me, when I think about it, it comes down to a couple different sets of questions that I ask myself. And the answer to these questions will really determine how you make your choices within life. And here's what they are. What are we going to worship? Who are we going to worship? And then what are we going to trust? And who are we going to trust? Okay, this morning we're going to be focusing in on refocusing our trust in God. That when we feel out of sorts and we know that when we're following Christ and we're supposed to stick out and not just blend in with the world, when we're doing that, how do we refocus our trust in what God is doing? And so we're going to be going to probably one of the most popular books in the whole Bible. If you were a kid that grew up in church, you most certainly heard the kid version stories of the book that we're going to be in. This is a book that is full of a hot fire and a lion's den. And so if you grew up in church, you know that we are going to be reading or hearing this epic grand tale out of the book of Daniel. Okay, this is probably one of the most extraordinary couple stories that you're ever gonna hear in the Bible. And so Daniel is no different than any of the other prophets that we read about in the Old Testament, the times before Jesus. Daniel, along with other people from Jerusalem, from his home, have been exiled, have been taken out of their home to Babylon. They've been captured and they've been forced to live in this foreign land called Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king of Babylon, he's the one that made this happen. And so he brought all these Jewish women, he brought all these Jewish men into his empire, and he asked one of his closest assistants. Kings always had lots of people around them, and one of his closest assistants, he asked him, hey, I want you to go out of all the Jewish men, and I want you to pick the finest and best of the Jewish men out there. I want the smart ones, I want the good-looking ones, I want the strong ones, I want anyone that is fit to serve a king. That is what King Nebuchadnezzar wanted. He wanted the top of the Jewish men. And so once that group was picked, they were enrolled in a 3-year training program. And that 3-year training program consisted of learning Babylonian language, learning Babylonian literature, culture. The king wanted them to know everything about being a Babylonian. Basically, the task at hand that he was trying to do is he was trying to strip them of any identity that they had of being Israelite men, Hebrew men that worshiped God. And they would have said, the one true God. He wanted to strip all of that away. He wanted them to love Babylonian culture, love Babylonian way of life, love the Babylonian gods, the multiple gods that they worshiped. He wanted them to love everything about Babylon. That was the goal of this 3-year thing. King Nebuchadnezzar didn't want anybody to stick out. He wanted everybody to blend in. You were going to be the same. You were going to look the same. You were going to follow the same laws. You were going to follow everything I say. That is what King Nebuchadnezzar wanted. And so once this 3-year schooling was done, then all these people that made it through the training would then enter the king's service. So many men entered this training, but there were really 4 men that stuck out among the whole class. 4 men that were just like top notch. One of them, of course, was Daniel. And then the other 3, they have very strange names, not like Daniel: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These 4 guys rose to the top of the class, and they clearly were going places within King Nebuchadnezzar's empire. They were wise, they were good-looking, they were strong, they were fast learners. That's who these guys were. But most importantly, all 4 of these men were completely committed and faithful to God. Like, without a doubt, they were going to trust their God, the God that they loved, the God that loved them. Well, they're in the beginning stages of this 3-year program, and their first dilemma comes to them. And I want to read you what this says. Here in the first chapter of Daniel, it says, "Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service." And then we're going to skip ahead to verse 8. It says, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way." Now this seems strange. This seems like a strange dilemma, right? Why is this food and wine such a big deal? Why does this matter to Daniel so much? Well, if you notice, it says this is coming straight from the king's table. Okay? This is the king's food. This is good food. You don't serve a king garbage food. You don't serve a king garbage wine. This is the best of the best, and this is coming straight from the king's table. And so in order to not be enticed, to feel like Daniel was man, I'm someone important. I'm better than all the Israelite people that were brought here into exile. In order for him to not be enticed by that kind of luxurious lifestyle, he just refused it. He said, I don't want to put myself in a position where I feel like I'm going to be so important, so above everybody else, that I'm just going to get really nice and comfortable here. And it's going to take my urgency. It's going to take my affection. It's going to take my attention away from the God that I love. Because I think the king's intentions to give them the best of the best, to give them his food and his wine, is to basically kind of manipulate them and say, this is your life for the rest of your life. You just fall into line and you do what I say and you become part of my servants. This can be yours. It was a power move on the king's strategy, and Daniel knew it, and he did not want to give in. But if you notice, Daniel was actually quite polite about it. He asked permission. Can I please not eat this food? This is something that I would really not like to do. And so even though he disagreed, he did it in a polite way to someone that had power over him. And so when I look at this, I just think about what today is like. And I think about what is the modern equivalent of the king's food, of the king's table today. And I don't think this is going to surprise anybody here, but money is definitely one of those things. It's the search and the desire to have more money for success. Money equals success. And that when we have that, we feel like we have we've reached some moment in life where we feel like, I feel good. I feel like I've reached a moment where I'm satisfied. And we know that money can do that. It has the ability to do that, but it is not the answer to all those questions. And so money is the obvious one, but then also just comfort. Comfort, right? Don't you just want things to be easier, faster, quicker, more convenient? That's like the message of every single commercial you see today. That's exactly what they're selling. They're selling easier, faster, more convenient. And when we look at money and we look at comfort, that is the king's feast granted to us every single day. Every single day, the king's feast is laid out to us. You know, I have a really good friend here in the Toledo area, and he is a local business owner, and he does very, very well for himself. I have no clue how much money he makes, but he does very, very well for himself. And we have struck up a friendship over the years, and this guy, he loves God. He loves Jesus. He serves people all the time, and he has more money than I think he knows what to do with. But he has made a conscious decision over the years, I'm not going to give in to the king's feast. There's nothing wrong with being rich. There's nothing wrong with making a lot of money. He's built his business up so it makes a lot of money, so he can get more clients. That's how you run a business. But what he has told me over and over again, Matt, I don't want this money to control me. I don't want it to manipulate me in thinking that I've accomplished something. This money that I have, it's God has given it to me. And I have seen this man hand out so much money to other organizations. I've been a direct benefit of here at H2O Toledo. He has given H2O Toledo money. And he has just continuously told me over and over again, this is God's money, and so I give it in that way. And because he knows that it's tempting to hold on to the king's feast if he just holds it for himself. And I've loved the example that he has shown me over and over again. And then about a year ago, I was in Memphis, Tennessee. When the pandemic hit, I was with students on spring break, and we got to meet an extraordinary couple. We got to meet a guy named Don, and I believe his wife's name was Linda. And they lived most of their adult lives just like 5 miles outside of inner city Memphis. 5 miles. He worked at a church with thousands of people, and he had worked there for a long time. And at some point, he became aware of the struggles that people had just 5 miles away from him in the city of Memphis, where there were education problems, there were financial problems, there were resource problems where people weren't getting the same resources as people that were getting just 5 miles outside of Memphis. He saw a lot of injustice. And Don and Linda, who have to be in their 50s, they decided this isn't acceptable. We're living this comfortable life just 5 miles away, and these people within the city of Memphis who we've been around our whole lives, we didn't realize the struggles that they had. And so they decided, we're going to sell our home, and we're going to move into the heart of Memphis, Tennessee, and we're going to start fighting against these problems and try to help these people. And it's amazing of the stories that they told us. The stories of success and the stories of like absolute heartbreak and struggle. How where they would take 1 step forward and they would get knocked down and take 8 steps back. And they've been living there for years trying to serve their community. They turned their garage into an after-school tutoring center where kids who are struggling in school already and don't have the resources in their public schools, they come to Don and Linda and they get their homework done and they learn. And it's amazing to see how they walked away from the life of comfort to live now really a life that is so much harder. It really is so much more stressful. But you could see the joy in them as they shared their story with us. And it was a privilege to be able to see people that have committed and taken very seriously the example, I don't want to live at the King's Feast table anymore. I don't want to live that kind of life. I want to give it away. Because culture tells us to eat that feast over and over again. Consume. Eat it. There's no harm in it. But we should choose to trust God that He has something different for us. That He has a fulfilled life of giving our life away. Okay, I want to move forward in the story where we're going to come to a little bit more familiar parts of the book of Daniel. And this is where his friends get involved, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, so after the story I just shared, these 3 guys, they become pretty high up servants with King Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. They were so wise and talented that they worked their way up into prominent positions, and at the same time, directly related to the work that they were doing, isn't it crazy? King Nebuchadnezzar becomes more powerful. His power starts increasing, and I think that starts to go to his head a little bit. So he creates this image of gold. That's what the story tells us. It's not very descriptive. It just keeps saying that he creates this image of gold. It could be a few different things. It could be an image of some of the gods that the Babylonians worshipped, or it could have been an image of himself. Not really sure, but some sort of image that King Nebuchadnezzar made, and he said, every time music plays throughout the kingdom, I want everyone to bow down and worship this image. He put that into law. He put it into effect. Well, this becomes a little bit problematic for these 3 men, because like I mentioned earlier, they are deeply committed to worshiping and being faithful to their God, the one true God. Not these Babylonian gods, not King Nebuchadnezzar, even though they were under his servantship. They didn't want to worship anything else. They wanted to love God and faithfully commit themselves to Him and nobody else. So when the music played throughout the kingdom, everyone else, boom, down on the ground, worshiping. But not them. They wouldn't do it. And word got back to King Nebuchadnezzar. People saw that they weren't bowing down and worshiping, and they said, hey, king, you got a problem. These guys aren't listening. And so he calls them before him, King Nebuchadnezzar does, He's like, do you really not bow down to the image of gold that I placed? And basically threatens him. He says, because if you don't, there's going to be consequences. I'm going to throw you into a furnace. I will destroy you. I will put an end to this disobedience. Check out this response. This had to be terrifying to respond this way back to the king. They said, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. This is the best part. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So with their lives on the line, and the consequence being absolute death, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they draw a line in the sand. They're basically saying, your majesty, that's being respectful, king, we work for you. We'll do all sorts of things. We've done all sorts of things for you. But there's one thing that we will not do, and this is it. We will not worship this image that you've put up in front of us. The rest of the culture, the rest of the kingdom that you have set up, they might do that. We're just not going to. We're going to stick out. We're going to be different, and we are ready to pay the consequences. Okay, you can imagine that this did not go well with the king. King Nebuchadnezzar, he got so angry, and he got so irrational that he actually ordered the furnace to be heated up 7 times hotter than it usually is, which makes 0 sense, right? Like, if you're going to burn somebody, fire will do. It doesn't need to be hotter, right? And so he gets on a power trip, and he says, I want you to burn it up 7 times hotter, and we're going to throw these guys in. So they're tied up by the king's orders, and they are thrown into the fire. And for some reason, I'm not really sure why, but I'm sure the king, for his reasons, he wanted to stick around and see the show. So he sticks around to see these guys burned up, or so he thought, because that's not what he witnesses. That's not what he sees. And as he's looking into the fire, he sees something strange. And he asks one of his servants close by, he says, we tied up 3 guys and threw them into the fire, right? Like, I'm just trying to confirm that's exactly what we did. And his assistant was like, yeah, that's exactly what we did. But King Nebuchadnezzar says, so why do I see 4 men in there, and they're all walking around? They're not tied up. They're not being burned up. They're not being consumed. And this 4th guy looks like the son of a god. Like, he looks different. Why am I seeing this? So he calls for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He says, hey guys, come out of the fire. He probably could have called for that 4th guy, but that probably freaked him out a little bit. So he just called for the 3 that he knew. Hey guys, come out of the fire. And this is what he says to these 3 guys. He says, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's commands and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now, before I get into kind of why this matters to us and what the implications are, I want to share one last story. Again, it's another story that many of you, if you grew up in church, you know. And this is where Daniel's going to return to the story. So King Nebuchadnezzar, he's no longer in power. His son had taken over for a long time, and his son was really kind of full of himself made some poor decisions. And as a result, the Babylonians were actually taken over by another kingdom. And another king took charge. His name was King Darius. And again, Daniel was absolutely killing it in his responsibilities. Like, he was climbing the ladder of in the kingdom and being a servant to the king. And King Darius took notice, and he was actually about to put Daniel in charge of the whole kingdom. Okay? He was about to put him in charge, like take care of daily affairs. Now remember, this is a Jewish man who was taken from his home to live in a foreign land that did not belong to him, that he was tried to be forced into become part of the Babylonian culture, everything about it, to love everything about it, and he has risen the ranks of being in this kingdom, and King Darius is about to put him completely in charge. This ruffled some feathers. Some people got pretty angry, and they were jealous of Daniel. And so they went to the king, and they said, hey, you know what you should do? You should put a law into effect that for the next 30 days, only people can pray to you. People need to pray to you, O king. And King Darius, he's a king, kind of likes that. He's like, that sounds pretty cool. I'd love people to pray to me. So he said, sure, why not? What could the harm be? Well, he signed it into law, effective immediately. And these servants of the king, they knew that Daniel would not be down with this. They knew that he would defy this order. And that's exactly what happened. And here's what it says in Daniel 6. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knee 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. So just like Daniel had been doing the whole time, he had been praying 3 times a day, every single day. He just, when he found out that it went into law, he said, I'm not going to change my schedule. This is what I do. I'm going to trust God. And here's the thing. He knew that there would be consequences. He had lived in this kingdom long enough to see multiple kings that he worked for do and punish people for lesser things, to have people killed. So he knew that if he did this, there would be some consequences. But he did it anyways. And King Darius did find out because these men basically set Daniel up. And they turned him in. And they said, hey, we got someone. They're not praying to you. They're praying to their God. And King Darius is like, who is it? It's Daniel. And Darius is devastated. He's devastated. He actually respects Daniel. Like I said, he was about to put him in charge of the whole kingdom. And he is devastated. He's like, no, anybody but Daniel. And he actually tries to figure out a way to get Daniel out of it. He tries to figure out a way to get Daniel out of being thrown into this den of lions where he will surely be eaten. He tries all day. Like, there's got to be some way that I can reverse this. But in the end, a king can't embarrass himself. And if he reversed his order, that's exactly what he would have done. And people would have thought he was soft. So he had to go through with it. So he comes before Daniel right before he's thrown into the lion's den, and he basically says, I hope your God is with you. I hope your God is with you. You obviously trust him for lots of things, and I hope he's with you. So he's thrown into the lion's den. King Darius goes to sleep. Next morning, he comes back, and he I don't know if he runs or not, but he gets there quickly, and he goes to the lion's den. He opens up the door, and he says, Daniel, are you there? Are you alive? And Daniel's like, yep, I'm good. Good to go. My God saved me. And this is how King Darius responds. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. So I just want to repeat the questions that I asked you earlier, kind of the two sets of questions that are going to shape how we make decisions in our life. What are we going to worship? Who are we going to worship? What are we going to trust? And who are we going to trust? Now, I can't promise you the stories are going to end like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those were stories that kind of ended pretty smoothly, right? And there's lots of stories within the Bible where it does not end the same way. But that's not the point. Here's what I can guarantee you, is that when you are in these exile moments and that you are trusting God, I can promise you that God will be with you. God will be with you. He never leaves us. He never abandons us. That when we follow him and we live our lives as exiles, he's with us all the time. That truth becomes more powerful to me the older I get. It seems pretty unbelievable that God is with us in our sorrow, in our struggle, in our pain. So that's the first promise. Second is that others will notice you sticking out. When a culture that is going in one direction, when a culture that is willing to worship lots of different things other than God, when a culture that is willing to trust in other things and other people other than God is going in one direction, you will stick out because you are living your life differently. King Nebuchadnezzar noticed. King Darius noticed. I think that's the part of the story that I left out with King Nebuchadnezzar, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He noticed. He noticed. It's beautiful to see that when people see us living differently and following and trusting God, that living this life of exile, they take notice. So every day becomes a choice of trust. Every day, as our attention is being called for in different directions and divided from God in our worship of God, every day when the feast at the king's table calls us, we have the choice to refocus and trust God. And that's how I want to pray for you right now as we close this morning. God, I thank you. I thank you, God, that you are enough to be trusted. I thank you that there's story after story within the Bible. There's story after story of just people in this room and people that are watching on the live stream. They have stories of seeing your faithfulness come through. They have stories of how they went out on a limb and trusted you, even though it was difficult. And maybe that wouldn't have been their first choice, and they knew that there were going to be consequences, but they trusted you anyways. I pray that that's what our church is known for. I pray that that's what I'm known for. God, that I look at life and that I lay my life down for the sake of other people, and I trust you as I move forward. We need you to help us do that. We can't do that on our own. That is not going to be our choice almost every single time. But God, when we allow you and we invite you and we choose you, it becomes more of a possibility. So I pray for strength, grace, and mercy, and perseverance. We love you, Jesus. Amen.
There's a grace when the heart is under fire, Another way when the walls are closing in. And when I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone. There was another in the fire, standing next to me. There was another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminded of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears the burden, where another died for me. There is another in the fire. All my dead left for dead beneath the waters. I'm no longer a slave to my sin anymore. And should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning, either way I will bow to the things of this world. And I know I will never be alone. There is another in the fire, standing next to me. There is another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding, when power set me free, there is a grave that holds nobody. Now the power lives in me. There is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the fire. And I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness bows to him. I can hear the roar in the heavens as the space between wears thin. I can feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. Nothing stands between us. Nothing stands between us. There is no other name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. So come with me in the space between all the things unseen and this reckoning. I know I will never be alone. And I know I will never be alone. There'll be another in the fire, standing next to me. There'll be another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding how good you've been to me, I'll count the joy from every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. And I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness bows to him. I can hear the roar 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. Climb mountains if the mountains were where you hide. Oh, how far I'd scale the valleys if you graced the other side. Oh, how long have I chased rivers from lowly seas to where they rise, against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartaches, you're neither more nor less inclined. I would search and stop at nothing. You're just not that hard to find. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys of the sea. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is, in the highlands and the heart of the sea. Oh, 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 how far beneath your glory does your kindness extend the path, from where your feet rest on the sunrise to where you sweep the sinner's path. And oh, how fast would you come running if just a shadow through the night? Trace my steps through all my failures and walk me out the other side. Well, who could dare ascend that mountain, that valleyed hill called Calvary, but for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys of the sea. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is, in the highlands in the heart of the sea. Whoa. 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 Whatever I walk through, wherever I am, you're making if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song of ascent. Wherever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, and if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song of ascent. My song of ascent. Whoa, whoa. My song of ascent. Whoa, whoa. From the gravest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace, a mighty river flowing upwards from a deep but empty grave. I will praise you on the mountains, I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys or the sea. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same.
All right, guys. Thanks for good worship. Like the song says, wherever I walk through, wherever I am, God will be with us. So I hope going into your next week that you feel that's true for you. Check out our Are You Bored posters. We've mentioned them for a couple of weeks now. If you've been in H2O for a while, or if you're just checking us out for the first time, we'd love to get you connected to different groups that have similar interests to you. And we'll see you at Life Group this week, hopefully on one of the days throughout the week. And we're excited that you guys tuned in today. Have a good week.